The sun was dipping low over the rugged horizon, painting the dusty plains in shades of orange and crimson. John McCall stood on the porch of his weather-beaten farmhouse, squinting into the distance where the tall grasses swayed under the gentle breeze. Out here, in the far reaches of New Mexico territory, a man had only the company of the wind and the creak of his own soul. The years had passed in a slow, lonely rhythm, marked only by the steady plow of his fields and the crackle of his fire at night. John was a man carved by hardship. He'd come west chasing freedom and fortune but found little of either. The frontier was unforgiving, crops failed, rains were scarce, and friends were fleeting. The only ties he held were to the land and the quiet memories of his family back east, long gone now. His heart ached for companionship, but his days were spent in solitude. The silence, a constant companion. That afternoon, as John was repairing a broken fence post, he noticed something unusual near the edge of the woods bordering his property. A faint rustling caught his attention. His hand instinctively rested on the handle of his Colt revolver as he moved cautiously toward the sound. Between the trees, a young man was slumped against a rock, bleeding from a wound in his side. His breath shallow and ragged. John didn't know much about the Apache, who lived deeper in the canyons and mesas beyond the plains. But desperation was a universal language. Without hesitation, John lifted the stranger, careful not to worsen the injury. The young man's dark eyes fluttered open, a flicker of recognition and pain in their depths. "What happened?" John asked, urgency thick in his voice. "Ambush. My band. .. The young man whispered. They took my father." John frowned. This was no ordinary traveler. The wound and the words hinted at a dangerous situation, one that might pull John into a conflict far beyond his quiet farm. The young man introduced himself as Tayanita, the son of Apache chief Narco. The chief was a powerful leader, respected and feared by settlers and natives alike. Tayanita had been out scouting when a group of hostile rival warriors attacked. He escaped but not without cost. His father was captured, held hostage by the rival band deep within the canyonlands. John knew he had a choice. He could turn Tayanita away, back to the dangers waiting for him, or he could help risking his own safety, his solitary life, and perhaps drawing the wrath of men who didn't take kindly to outsiders meddling in native affairs. That night, under the glow of a full moon, John made his decision. With Tayanita weak but determined, they set off into the shadows, toward the canyon that held the fate of the Apache chief. As they rode into the unknown, John felt something stirring inside, a sense of purpose, a spark of adventure that had long lain dormant. This wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a chance for redemption, for connection, for something more than just survival. The plains stretched endless before them, wild and unpredictable. But for the first time in a long while, John wasn't alone. The cold bite of the night air crept in as John and Tayanita rode deeper into the rugged canyons. The moon hung high, casting long shadows over the jagged cliffs and scrubby brush. John's horse, a steady bay stallion named Buck, picked its way carefully over the rocky terrain, muscles tense but sure. Tayanita leaned heavily against John's side, his breathing uneven but steady. The young Apache was stronger than he looked, but the wound sapped his strength like a slow poison. John had torn a strip of his own shirt and wrapped it tightly around the bleeding cut on Tayanita's side. "What made you risk it? Come out this far alone?" John asked quietly, breaking the silence. Tayanita's dark eyes flickered with pain and pride. "My father, he is more than chief. He is our people's hope. If he dies, the tribe will fall to chaos. I had to try. No one else could." John nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility. Out here, survival was more than a matter of personal grit. It was about protecting those you loved and the fragile bonds that held communities together. The canyon walls rose like ancient sentinels, whispering secrets of centuries past. John's mind wandered to the stories he'd heard in towns, the uneasy peace between settlers and Apache bands, the skirmishes over land and pride, the unspoken lines drawn deep in the soil. "Who took him?" John asked. "A rival band called the Red Hawks," Tayanita said. "They want to weaken us, take our hunting grounds. They have the chief as a bargaining chip." John felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. Rival tribes were dangerous enough, but with settlers caught in the middle, bloodshed was almost certain. They pressed on, the canyon narrowing until the horses had to slow to a walk. Twisted mesquite trees clawed at the sky, and the air smelled faintly of sage and smoke. Somewhere up ahead, hidden in the labyrinth of rocks, the Red Hawks waited. John could feel the tension mounting. This wasn't going to be a quick rescue. "Rest now," John said, sliding from Buck's back and helping Tayanita down. "We'll make a plan come dawn." Tayanita nodded, but his eyes stayed sharp, alert for any sound beyond the wind. John built a small fire, careful to keep the flames low. The crackling of dry wood was comforting, a small beacon of warmth in the cold wilderness. They ate what little provisions John had, a bit of hardtack. Dried meat. Talked quietly, sharing stories in the flickering firelight. John told Tianita about his life on the farm, the endless days of toil, the loneliness that pressed down like a weight. The Apache youth listened, his expression softening. "I never thought I'd meet a white man who would help me like this," Tianita said. "Out here, most see us as enemies." John shrugged. "Out here, the land don't care about color or blood. It's survival, plain and simple, and sometimes, it takes strangers to remind us of that." As the fire died to embers, Tianita's eyes drifted closed. John sat beside him, keeping watch through the long hours. Every rustle, every distant howl, made his hand twitch toward his pistol, nerves wired tight. When dawn broke, painting the canyon in pale gold, John awoke to find Tianita gone. Panic surged through him until he heard a faint whisper. "Come." Tianita beckoned from behind a cluster of boulders. John followed, heart pounding. They had moved quietly, stealthy as shadows, to a narrow ridge overlooking a small camp nestled in a rocky hollow. There, surrounded by rough-hewn walls of stone and brush, were the Red Hawks. Dozens of warriors, tense and watchful, clustered around a fire. And there, at the center, was Chief Narco, bound but unbroken, his gaze fierce and proud. John's jaw tightened. They had to act in fast. "Can you take out the guards?" John whispered. Tianita nodded. "Yes, but only if we work together." John surveyed the camp carefully, their positions, the sentries, the rocky cover. He knew his rifle and revolver wouldn't do much good in a direct fight. They'd have to be clever, use the canyon's shadows to their advantage. As they slipped down the ridge, hearts hammering, John felt something shift inside him. This was no longer just about a stranger's son, it was about justice, honor, and the fragile threads that could bind even the loneliest of men to a greater cause. John and Tianita moved like shadows through the rocky brush, their eyes fixed on the camp below. The Red Hawks were unaware of the danger creeping closer with each careful step. The air was thick with anticipation and the faint scent of smoke and sweat. John pulled out his rifle. A lever-action Winchester, worn but reliable. He checked the chamber silently and nodded to Tianita. The plan was simple but risky. Create a distraction to draw the guards away, then sneak in to free Chief Narco. Tianita's face was calm, but John could see the fierce fire burning behind his dark eyes. For his father, for his people. He was ready to risk everything. John crept toward a nearby outcropping and paused behind a cluster of boulders. He took careful aim at a cluster of dry brush near the edge of the camp. A sharp crack echoed through the canyon as he fired, and flames immediately licked the dry grass. The fire snapped and hissed, sending the guards into a frenzy. "Now," John whispered. The two men darted down the ridge, sticking low behind rocks and sagebrush. As the camp erupted into chaos, John spotted a lone sentry running toward the fire. Away from the chief's position, Tianita slipped around the far side, moving swiftly and silently. John followed closely behind, heart pounding in his chest. They had only minutes before the guards realized what was happening. John rounded a large boulder and froze. A young warrior sat by a fire, sharpening his knife. The man looked up, eyes wide with surprise. Before the warrior could react, John swung the butt of his rifle, catching him off guard. The man slumped unconscious to the ground. "Quiet," John hissed, dragging the warrior's body out of sight. Tianita was already at the chief's side, quickly cutting the ropes binding his wrists and ankles. Chief Narco's eyes opened, sharp and assessing. "You came for me," the chief said, voice hoarse but steady. John nodded. "We're getting you out of here, but you have to move fast." Narco rose carefully, steady despite his bindings. Together, the three men slipped back toward the shadows of the canyon wall, avoiding the flickering light and shouting voices behind them. Suddenly, a sharp whistle cut through the air. John's blood ran cold. "Trap," Tianita muttered from the shadows. Several Red Hawks warriors appeared, weapons drawn. The fire had been a lure, and John and Tianita had fallen right into the trap. Narco stepped forward, standing tall, despite his fatigue. "We fight," he declared. John's revolver roared, echoing off the canyon walls. The crack of rifles and the clash of knives filled the air as the battle erupted in the narrow canyon pass. John ducked behind a boulder as arrows whistled past. He fired carefully, taking down one attacker after another. Tianita fought like a man possessed, his movements fluid and deadly. Chief Narco's voice rang out, rallying his son and the farmer. "For our people, For freedom. The fight was brutal but swift. The Red Hawks, caught off guard by the ferocity of their prisoners' counterattack, began to fall back. When the last warrior disappeared into the shadows, the three men stood panting, bloodied but alive. John wiped sweat from his brow, eyes scanning the darkening canyon. "We need to move," Narco said. "The Red Hawks will send more." Tayanita nodded. "There's a hidden path to the north. It will take us to safety, but it's dangerous." John looked at the chief and his son. Despite everything, he felt a strange kinship with these men, bound by the wild land and the fight to survive. "Lead the way," John said. As they disappeared into the night, the canyon swallowed their footsteps, leaving only the faint glow of dying embers behind. The moon hung low, casting a silver glow over the rocky canyon as John, Tayanita, and Chief Narco pressed onward. The hidden path was little more than a narrow trail carved by the elements, steep drops on one side and jagged cliffs on the other. The silence was heavy, broken only by the crunch of their boots and the steady labored breaths of the chief. John's muscles ached from the fight, and his mind raced. Every shadow could be an enemy, every sound a threat. The canyon walls seemed to close in, the rocky cliffs echoing their footsteps like the drums of an unseen war party. Tayanita moved ahead, his senses sharper than any scout John had ever met. "This way," he said, his voice low. "The trail twists and turns only. Someone who knows these lands can navigate it safely." The chief rode in the middle, stoic but clearly weakened from captivity. John kept a steady watch on their rear, pistol ready. They'd made it nearly half a mile when a rustle in the brush stopped them cold. John's hand shot to his revolver. "Hold up," he whispered. From the shadows stepped a lone figure, a young woman, her dark hair tangled and her eyes wide with a mix of fear and resolve. She wore a simple dress, dirt smudging her skin, but her posture was proud, defiant. "Who are you?" John demanded, keeping his gun leveled. The woman held up her hands. "Peace. My name is Kaya. I'm from the Apache tribe, a friend to Chief Narco." Tayanita relaxed slightly. "Why follow us?" Kaya glanced nervously over her shoulder. "The Red Hawks have captured many of our people. I escaped their camp and came to warn you. More are coming. They want to stop you from leaving the canyon." John frowned. "We don't have the luxury of time." Kaya nodded. "I know a safer way through the old mines. It's dangerous, but it will get you past their patrols." Narco studied Kaya for a moment, then nodded in approval. "We will trust you." With Kaya leading the way, the small group took the winding path toward the forgotten mines. The narrow tunnels yawned like the maw of some ancient beast, dark and foreboding. The air smelled of earth and rust, and distant drips echoed like gunshots in the hollow silence. John lit a lantern, the flickering flame casting eerie shadows on the rough walls. The mines were treacherous and stable beams, sudden drops, and passages so tight John had to squeeze through on hands and knees. Hours passed in near darkness, each step heavy with uncertainty. Suddenly, a faint sound, voices, shouting. "They're close," Kaya whispered, her grip tightening on John's arm. John pulled his revolver from its holster. "Get ready." They crept toward the noise, the tension so thick it pressed on their chests like a weight. As they rounded a bend, they spotted a Red Hawks patrol guarding an entrance, unaware of the group hidden in the shadows. Kaya gestured toward a narrow side tunnel. "We slip past here." John nodded, heart pounding. The only way out was through danger, through fire and blood if necessary. As they slipped deeper into the mines, John felt the loneliness of the plains fade, replaced by something fierce and wild, like the spirit of the West itself. For the first time in years, he was part of something bigger. Ahead, the path promised freedom or death. The tunnels of the old mines twisted and turned like the veins of the earth itself, cold and unforgiving. The flickering lantern light danced on the rough stone walls, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to shift with every step. John's boots crunched softly on the gravel floor, each noise amplified in the heavy silence. Tayanita led the way, his senses alert for even the faintest sound of pursuit. Behind him, Kaya moved with the grace of a wildcat, her eyes scanning the darkness. Chief Narco followed slowly, leaning on a gnarled wooden staff. The strain of captivity etched in every step. John kept his Colt revolver ready, his fingers itching for a fight. He'd faced down outlaws and wild beasts before, but the claustrophobic tunnels felt different, like the earth itself was closing in, suffocating and relentless. Suddenly, a faint noise echoed ahead, soft footsteps, voices whispering in the dark. The Red Hawks were close. "Get ready," John whispered. They pressed against the cold stone wall, hearts pounding, waiting. The patrol came into view, 3 armed warriors, moving cautiously. They hadn't seen the group yet. John steadied his breathing, fingers on the trigger. Without warning, Kaya slipped silently behind the nearest warrior and snapped his neck with a swift, practiced move. The other two spun around, guns drawn, but John's revolver barked twice, each shot finding its mark. Tyanita was already on the third man, a blur of motion and fierce strikes. The fight was brutal but brief. Bodies hit the ground with heavy thuds, the echo ringing through the tunnels. John wiped sweat from his brow. We can't stop. More will come. They hurried deeper into the mines, the air growing colder, heavier. The silence returned, but now it was charged with urgency. Every moment brought them closer to freedom or death. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a wide cavern, the ceiling lost in darkness above. In the center lay the rusted remains of mining carts and broken tools, a graveyard of forgotten dreams. Kaya stopped, her eyes wide. This is the old junction. We can take the eastern shaft, but it's unstable. Narco's voice was steady but weary. We have no choice. John surveyed the crumbling supports and loose rocks. One wrong step could bring the whole cavern down. They moved cautiously, each footfall deliberate. The earth groaned beneath them as they crossed, the tension nearly unbearable. Halfway across, a sudden rumble shook the cavern. Dust and debris rained down. Run! John shouted. They sprinted toward the far side as rocks tumbled behind them, barely escaping the collapse. Breathing hard, they emerged into the cold morning light outside the mines. The vast plains stretched before them, open and free. Narco looked toward the horizon, determination burning in his eyes. We must reach the river before the Red Hawks regroup. John nodded, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. The journey wasn't over, but the worst was behind them. For now, the sun blazed high over the endless plains as John, Tyanita, and Chief Narco rode hard toward the river. The cool water was their hope for safety, a boundary where they might find allies and peace. But the Red Hawks were not far behind. John's muscles ached, the dirt and dust clinging to his skin, but he pushed Buck to his limits. The horse's hooves thundered against the dry earth, stirring up clouds of grit that hung heavy in the air. Tyanita rode beside John, silent and focused, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. Narco, once proud and unyielding, now wore the marks of his ordeal but held his head high. Suddenly, a cloud of dust erupted behind them. Red Hawks warriors in full pursuit, their war cries slicing through the air. John drew his revolver. They're gaining fast. We'll have to make a stand. The three riders veered off the main trail into a narrow gorge, a natural choke point where the Red Hawks couldn't use their numbers to full advantage. John dismounted, setting his rifle on a boulder and loading his revolver with practiced speed. Tyanita unsheathed his bow, nocking an arrow, eyes sharp as a hawk. Narco looked at John, gratitude and resolve in his gaze. Thank you, John, for saving my son. For saving me. John nodded. We do what we must. The Red Hawks charged, a fierce tide of painted faces and raised weapons. The gorge echoed with the clash of battle gunshots, arrows, cries of rage and pain. John's rifle barked, picking off riders as they pressed forward. Tyanita's arrows flew true, each one felling an enemy with silent precision. Narco, despite his weakness, fought fiercely with a tomahawk, his spirit unbroken. The battle raged until only a handful of Red Hawks remained, wounded and retreating into the dust. Breathing heavily, John wiped blood and sweat from his face. He looked at Narco and Tyanita, a bond forged in blood and hardship. Then Narco did something unexpected. He reached into a leather pouch and pulled out a small bundle, tied with beads and feathers. As a token of our gratitude and in honor of your courage, he said, I bring you a gift. The chief gestured to a group of women waiting nearby, 20 young brides from his tribe, dressed in colorful blankets and adorned with beads. Their eyes held a mix of curiosity, respect, and something else, hope. Choose one, Narco said, his voice strong and commanding. A wife to share your life with, and join our people. John's jaw tightened. The offer was overwhelming, a world away from his lonely existence on the farm. He thought of the long nights, the aching silence, the endless sky, and now, this sudden chance for belonging. He looked at the women, then at Narco and Tyanita. The land had brought them together in a way none could have predicted. After a long pause, John stepped forward and spoke. I won't choose today, he said quietly. But I won't forget this. I'm grateful. Narco smiled, understanding in his eyes. The choice will wait for you. For now, you are family. The sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows as the three men and their newfound allies rode off toward the river, toward a future uncertain, but filled with hope. John glanced back once more at the wild land behind him. The loneliness was gone. In its place was something stronger: connection, honor, and the promise of new beginnings on the untamed frontier.